Sibuluke sitshaba, sibuluke sitshaba sa Yesu, sitshaba sa Africa.
Years of national and social enslavement has taught the people of South Africa that there is no loftier goal in life than sacrifice for the liberation of one's country and the emancipation of one's people. This is a story of that struggle, of resistance against colonialism and apartheid. The struggle against colonialism, racial oppression and apartheid has for years been the hallmark of the South African struggle. Earlier, South African leaders and warriors had displayed courage and valor in the defense of their people, their lands, and their cattle. However, through their laws of divide and rule, as well as brute force, the colonialists were able to enslave the African people. Even then, the African people did not surrender, and instead continued their fight, employing other forms of struggle. It was at the turn of the century that the Africans succeeded in reorganizing themselves. This culminated in the formation of the African National Congress on the 8th of January 1912. The ANC is the oldest liberation organization on the African continent. One of the prominent leaders, Pixlika Isaka Seme, announced the formation of the South African Native Congress, later to be called the African National Congress. "We are one people," he said, urging all to forget the differences between and among the different African groups. From the time it was formed, the ANC had been pursuing the struggle through peaceful means. The approved methods of struggle were to ventilate grievances at public meetings and make representations by means of resolutions and deputations. However, their pleas and deputation, more often than not, fell on deaf ears. Instead, they were rewarded with intensified repression. Repression in the 20s saw a marked decline in the popularity of the ANC. It was during the war against fascism that gave impetus to the fight against racism. The ANC, meanwhile, was being strengthened by young people with radical and progressive ideas. Among these were Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela. These young people formed the ANC Youth League, a move that helped to give impetus to the struggle. In 1948, Afrikaner nationalism entrenched itself in South African white politics. The Nationalist Party won the elections and formed a new government that was to enunciate and entrench into law some of the most racist and discriminatory policies ever in South Africa. Total oppression ruled supreme, but this evoked firm resistance not only from the oppressed majority, but across color lines. The defiance campaign of the early 50s marked a departure from those deputations and pleas and ceaseless knocking at the doors of white supremacists. On the 26th of June 1952, the ANC launched a campaign for the defiance of unjust laws which resulted in the imprisonment of more than 8,000 people. The stage had been set for mass struggles that erupted throughout the country. Women and men stood resolute and demanded freedom and justice. The Women's March of 1956 was a clear indication of the bravery of the womenfolk of South Africa, and the men took note. South African history would henceforth place women and men on equal footing at the center of the stormy struggle. The leaders of the Congress movement had been pondering on the issue of what kind of South Africa they wished for the country. People from all walks of life throughout South Africa expressed their thoughts. These were collected and formed what was to be known as the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter is a document that expresses the hopes and the aspirations of the people of South Africa. The delegates that attended the Congress of the People and who deliberated on the wishes of the people were 2,844. In its preamble, it declares that South Africa belongs to all those who live in it, both black and white, and that no government can claim authority unless it is based on the will of the people. The Congress of the People was held in 1955. The people had spoken. In 1956, 156 people, among them the leaders of the ANC and other organizations such as the South African Indian Congress, the Colored People's Congress, and the Congress of Democrats, were put on trial. The main trial lasted until 1961, when all defendants were found not guilty. This trial occupies a special place in the history of South Africa. It was a calculated move by the racist regime to strike terror in the hearts of the general populace and to impress on the people that the government was capable of stifling all opposition in the country. The regime did not succeed in these machinations. The ruling party intensified repression by further introducing laws that sought to make Africans foreigners in their own land. One of these was the Pass Laws, where all Africans had to carry this document wherever they went. Failing to produce it upon demand meant imprisonment. The massacres in Sharpeville in 1960, which reverberated the world over, and which preceded the banning of the ANC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, and other organizations, convinced many that the struggle through peaceful protests had clearly come to a dead end. Unarmed people were mowed to their death for daring to protest against the unjust Pass Laws. 69 people were killed and hundreds injured during these peaceful protests. Owing to concerted pressure on the government by millions of people around the world, the regime, in a bid to clamp down on protests, declared a state of emergency. Meanwhile, Nelson Mandela and other leaders started in earnest to prepare for a time when armed conflict with the white racists would ensue. This they did by forming Umkhonto weSizwe, or MK, the military outfit which would be recognized as the military wing of the ANC. The birth of Umkhonto weSizwe was dramatically announced in 1961 by the MK High Command. Its manifesto proclaimed that the time comes in life of any nation when there remain only two choices: submit or fight. The time has now come to South Africa. We shall not submit, and we have no choice but to hit back by all means within our power in defense of our people, our future, our freedom. Nelson Mandela became the commander-in-chief of Umkhonto weSizwe. The battle lines had been drawn for a grueling and bitter fight that would see some of our leaders and cadres go underground, others arrested, and yet others go into exile. 1976 witnessed a students' uprising that was to be the turning point in the history of South Africa. Hundreds of unarmed children, some as young as 13, were mowed down by the heavily armed police in the streets of Soweto, a sprawling township in the outskirts of Johannesburg. Large groups, some of whom who were fleeing from the police, went on to join the ANC, its military wing, and other organizations. In fact, some of these had already been active members of the ANC inside the country before the Soweto uprising. These were the youth not only of Soweto, but coming from all over South Africa. South African poet laureate Mazizi Kunene refers to them as the angry generation who do not run from the fire. He says they are the children of iron, the fearless bees of the night, the wrath of the volcanic mountain, the abiding anger of their ancestral forefathers. The 80s experienced more repression as the regime exercised its might in the face of fierce resistance. The people, united in a formidable force, challenged the government and defied its laws. The United Democratic Movement was formed. Its objective was to draw the people in a united front against the apartheid system. Out of these efforts, the Mass Democratic Movement was born, which was a broader movement to unite different organizations against the racist regime and precipitated the downfall of one of the most hated regimes in the world. Consequently, the regime was forced to relent, and in early 1990, the ANC and other organizations were unbanned, followed by the release of political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela. Freedom was in the air. But even as the people's movement was unbanned, the regime still sought to score points in the attempt to weaken the freedom movement. Scores of people were killed by surrogates of the murderous regime. However, they could not stop the train of freedom. In 1994, South Africa gave hope to the world. It gave Africa and its diaspora tangible hope. The youth of today dare not fail the future generation, who when they come will look up to them for examples of dedication, of honesty, of hard work, and of knowledge. The celebratory mood during the ANC's commemoration of its 102 years in Mpumalanga, South Africa on the 8th of January 2014 was reminiscent of the mood 20 years ago in 1994, when South Africa gained its independence. President Jacob Zuma, in his keynote speech, remembered all those who gave their all for a free and democratic South Africa. President Zuma conferred the highest ANC honor, Isitalandwe, or Siaparankwe, on two of the oldest leaders of the ANC, Ruth Mompati and Gertrude Shope. The crowd roared with approval and acknowledgement. The triumph of a people's will is done.